The following is an Operation Podcast production.
And then I got a letter to play basketball at the University of Chicago. I was 17 years old. I was so excited. Like, this was the thing that I've been working for so long. So I took this letter to my academic counselor, and I told her, I'm like, hey, I don't know what to do next. I just know that, like, I want to play ball. I'm really excited. And she reads the letter, and she folds it back up, and she gives it back to me, and she says, you're not smart enough. She says, this is one of the best schools in the nation when it comes to academics, and you don't have what it takes. And I left that room believing her.
Yeah, they still tryna find a way to win. I the God, that's when it all begins. I don't need a rollie on my wrist. Perfect time and God with the assist. I've been working since I was a kid. I just gotta keep my head up. Running, I'm never gon' let. I'll never feed the haters cause they fed up. They still tryna find a way to win. I the God, that's when it all begins. I don't need a rollie on my wrist. Perfect time and God with the assist. I've been working since I was a kid. I just gotta keep my head up. Running, I'm never gon' let.
Johan, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming in, trekking all the way up from beautiful Encinitas.
Yeah.
And we met. It was a whole roundabout way that we met. So we have a mutual connection in a wonderful baseball agent.
Yeah.
Agent Hannaford. I'm friends with his wife. My wife knows them. We met through a bunch of different things. And he was at the gym one morning, and I was there for the thing. He's like, man, I should have asked you. Why didn't I? He was kind of beating himself up for not asking me. And he's like, this thing's happening. Do you want to come to this thing? And I know I haven't said what the thing is yet.
It's top secret.
And I still didn't know until I showed up. Even when I showed up, I still didn't know what was happening. And it turned out it was like some impromptu 8-hour awesome, just like free coaching session.
Yeah.
And we vibed. I jumped right in. I was like, yes to everything. You say yes, you show up. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to be the guy that kept talking, but like, I just kept talking and showing up.
Well, from jump, I was like, okay, he's done some work. Like, either he's worked with the coach or, he's just done some deep diving in his soul to figure things out. And I was like, and then I saw you had some sneakers on. So I was like, wait a minute, this dude. And you're Latino too, so I was like, you're the only one in the room, and so I'm Puerto Rican and Persian. I was like, this is my brother. I have a feeling this is my brother right here. So then we had, because this is the tough part, I think, as guys, right? It's like, okay, when you know, or at least you feel like you could vibe with somebody, how do you do the male version of like, hey, can we hang out? You know, you know what I mean? Like, what's the man version of that? And so I don't know if I've perfected the art, but I was like, yo, it'd be cool if we can kick it and have like a little Zoom conversation, and we did, and from there it's been history.
That was like our first coffee date.
Right, exactly, virtually. Right,
like you slid into my emails.
That's right. The man version, the very manly version. And then we've been sending each other memes and pictures of sneakers and stuff. So.
And then we DM each other all the new sneaker drops.
Right.
We've lost out on some sneaker drops. And then I copped a pair.
The ones that you have, I told you about those, and you hit and I didn't. Yeah. So I'm not jealous. It's absolute love, and I'm glad you hit them.
Well, I'm wearing them so you can see that I came out victorious on one of these.
Yeah, and those are 11 and a half, right?
Yeah.
So with Yeezys, I fit. So I'm an 11. But with Yeezys, I can fit an 11 and a half. So if you want to, every once in a while, maybe I could borrow them,
We can swap right now.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but.
I got a pair of those Unions too.
You do? I have the Storm Blue.
Yeah.
These may be some of the best sneakers of all time.
Oh, I love them. Union did well on that. And I look at all their other drops and I'm like, nah, these are the ones.
These are the ones. Yeah, so if people want to come to us for, sneaker advice, I feel like we could do a whole episode just on the love of sneakers.
Live through love, live through sneakers.
Yep, not bots though. We don't love the bots.
No, man, we got to get rid of that. But so who are you? What do you do? Tell me a little bit about you.
Yeah. So my name is Johan Martinez-Khalilian. Maybe I have the longest name of anybody that you've ever had on your podcast. Is that true in terms of like full-length letters and everything?
Did Ivana de Maria might have had a longer, fuller name?
Well, my full name would be Johan Luis Martinez-Khalilian.
You're up there.
What do you think? We got to count the letters and maybe you put them on the screen.
If you're not one, you're definitely the second.
And so a little bit of turn my backstory into potentially something interesting. I started speaking. So I'm a public speaker. I'm also an executive coach, primarily for athletes and artists. And then I dabble in a little bit of filmmaking on the side. That's my side passion. But I started speaking when I was 20 years old in college. I knew I had a voice and I wanted to inspire and encourage the world as a result. So I went into classrooms and spoke on healthy choices and things like that. And it really snowballed because from there, I had an opportunity to be on the Tyra Banks Show. And then that turned into my first conference where I spoke to 250 people. That was like the biggest live audience ever. And then that turned into 1,500 people on a speaking tour. And then I was doing a national tour before you know it. And then one day I'm in London sharing my story in another country. And you know, I'm just a kid from Chicago who didn't know that my story would have so much impact, but I kept running with it, you know, and then I moved to LA to do a 2-year leadership program and really investing in like how deep can I go with who I am and the contribution that I can make in the world. Started to make connections, build in like the film industry. And one of my friends, Jason Jaggard, who's the CEO of Novus Global, the coaching firm I'm part of, he was like recruiting me. And in the beginning, I was like, I don't quite know what this coaching thing is. He would explain it and it felt so mysterious. So there was like a disconnect for a while. Eventually, I decided to try it out for just like a month where I had a coach and was being coached. And then I said, okay, I need to get trained in this and learn how to coach people. So I did a 9-month program, and then we'll say the rest is history. I've built a really, you know, amazing practice, coaching some, you know, dope people from my standpoint, as well as my speaking career. So that's a little snapshot of who I am.
I love that. I didn't know that. Tyra Banks Show. It's a hell of a way to get
back in the
coaching.
day, Tyra.
Yeah.
If you remember Tyra, yep.
She was big back in the day.
She was big. She was really big. And what is she doing now? I don't know. Maybe I need to hit her up and say, can we have another interview?
Let's bring her on the show.
Right? Let's do.
Let's see what happens.
Right here. She could be right here.
Exactly.
I don't think she's a sneakerhead, but.
We'll gift her something.
Right, exactly. She might be a size 11 too. No, I'm not going to.
We love you, Tyra.
Right, exactly.
So why does someone need a coach, right? We're not talking about athletes. We're not talking about in that realm of the physical space of obviously what most people think a coach is. But what is a high performance coach? Why would someone seek someone out? And what can that do for me, you as an individual?
Yeah, well, if we just start on a simple level, if you really are interested in growing, hire a coach. If you're really interested in accomplishing what you say you want, and that thing that you want to accomplish is a stretch, hire a coach. Because naturally for us as people, we're going to lower the bar. We're going to, and I think you probably understand that from just like a workout perspective. You know, you can only get so many reps in on your own. And then you work with the trainer and they help you do that little extra. So the same is true from a mindset and performance standpoint when you work with the coaches. They're not going to allow you to lower the bar. They're not going to allow you to settle for less or compromise, you know, and that's part of what I love when I work with clients is we get really clear with what is the thing that you want. And let's make sure that that thing that you want, you can't accomplish on your own. Right? Like you need support to go get this thing. Because that's how I know you need me in order to go get it. Otherwise, just do your thing because you're going to accomplish stuff on your own. That's fine. But that stretch, the thing that requires you to grow, that's where I come in from a coaching standpoint.
Not allowing us, because you're saying we could set our own bar, but we negotiate that bar.
We negotiate all the time.
You can't negotiate with a trainer or a coach or accountability partner. It's also painful, right? Because you're paying a coach. So why wouldn't you do the things that you're paying for? Even a trainer or nutrition coach, you name it. Yeah.
Well, because on one level, we're consumed with comfort. Even those of us that will say we're growth oriented, there are spots in our life where we like our comfort zone, where we're okay with lowering our vision, where we will settle for less. So one, I help people sort of become aware of that. It's like, here's where your comfort's owning you. We all have those spots where, because you could be 90% growth mindset oriented, and then you have this 10% that you're not aware of. Do you want to see it? And do you want to grow there so that you could even shift that to like, okay, now I'm 99% growth mindset oriented, and now I have a 1% that I want to become aware of. So I would say that's one part of it, is every single human being is connected to comfort in some way and allows that to drive their life. Another part of it is we say that we're committed to whatever that thing is. If it's like, hey, I want to go create a new business, I want to write a book. I'm working with a NBA guy right now. He wants to improve his 3-point percentage from 27% to 40%, right? What gets in our way there is we're usually committed to what we call survival needs. And that is look good, feel good, be right, and be in control, right? So one of the examples that came up in my conversation with him was, he was like, we had a practice yesterday, and he's like, I'm committed to getting better, with my 3-point shot. And he's like, and I only shot 1 3-pointer in practice. And I asked him, I'm like, well, why'd you only shoot 1 3? What do you think he said?
Because I wanted to look good.
He said, I didn't want to miss, right? Which translates into what, that's the point of it, is I didn't want to look bad. And when I miss, I think I look bad, right? So through some of the conversation and coaching, it's like, well, you're never going to get better that way. Are you willing to look foolish to grow as a 3-point shooter? And again, right, that's one of the things that we will do naturally. We will choose the route of least resistance instead of choose to look foolish for a season in order to acquire the thing that you want. If you want to get better, sometimes you may not look that great along the way.
Plus, there's that quote, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So technically, he's already missed them all.
He's already missing, exactly. And because again, and here's the thing, he's in the NBA.
You're at the top.
Right? To think about, here's a guy who made it to the most elite platform as a basketball player, and yet there's these mindset traps that he's not aware of. And I see it in athletes all the time where they're actually no longer playing to win, if we use another catchphrase, because they're playing to not lose. And that is low-level performance. So, through some of the conversations that I have with my athletes as well as other folks, it's helping them to get clear with this. There's 2 very different ways to play the game. And are you playing to win? Because sometimes when you play to win, you will miss the mark. If you're playing to not lose, sure, you may not lose, but you also don't get the thing that you say that you want.
And to add someone to that as an example, Kobe Bryant played to win.
All the time.
Which is why people are like, oh, you're selfish. Oh, you missed this many shots. Oh, yeah, but you don't score 82 points in the game if you don't play to win.
100%. Yep. And same, for me, being a Chicago guy, born and raised, I watched Michael Jordan, who played to win every game. Like, he never had that low bar or never really doubted himself. He was coming at you, and he was going to find a reason to have a competitive edge to go win. So that's part of, whether it be Mamba mentality or, MJ mentality, it's helping folks that I work with develop that type of mindset.
So one could say, and like in the past, before doing some work and before digging in and going back to like how I should operate from love and senses, you rise to the top, you claw your way up, run over as many people, to get there. And we forget that if we leave people behind. So how do you take the play to win mentality? Because a lot of people will say, well, if I play to win, I'm leaving someone behind. But I know we can take people with us.
But yeah, 100%.
So what's the difference within playing to win, like with love for humanity, versus playing to win, I don't care who I kill, all the way up there?
It's funny because we just talked about MJ. And, when I grew up, I absolutely loved Michael Jordan, and he could do no wrong in my eyes. And then I saw The Last Dance.
Yep.
I was an adult, a little bit more refined. I had more wisdom and understanding. And then I realized the collateral damage that he created along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, here's a guy who was so great, who would literally beat anyone. And yet none of his teammates liked him.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely no other player in the league really liked him. His family was deconstructed in the process. And I'm like, if I were to have a conversation with him, I would ask him, like, was it worth it? Right? Like, if you could still be, and I think, so again, this is just my theory, because I think he could have actually accomplished more from love. I think he would have won more. I think he would have had a healthier dynamic with his teammates. I think he would have had a longer career. He wouldn't have had the burnout that he experienced, because that's what you saw in The Last Dance too. It's like he went up, he's like, I got to take a step away. I think building from fear and anger, which at times I saw in him, right? He wanted to eviscerate people. Like, I think it was BJ Armstrong who said it wasn't good enough for him to beat you. He wanted to put his foot on your head. Which again, he won games and he won championships. And for me, he is the GOAT. But he's the GOAT at a price that I don't think he had to pay. And I look at Steph, who to me is an example of a guy who plays from joy and from love. His teammates love playing with him. He knows when to step up. He knows, when to defer. And there's a lightness to him that I think MJ didn't have.
Yeah.
So that's part of what I invite people into too. It's like, you don't have to go accomplish at the cost of everyone around you, because that is rooted in fear and selfishness. What would it look like to go accomplish? Maybe it's the same from a different place, from love and from selflessness and from creativity and from joy and from play.
Yeah. A moment of silence for that.
Come on now.
But it's true. And you see it all the time. And, we can put Kobe back into that conversation, because there's so many people that hated him, so many people that loved him. But at the end of the day, what they looked at was his work ethic. And he killed himself for everyone to win. He wanted everyone to win. So it wasn't, yes, he was a winner, but I also like that. And I think misunderstanding sometimes is where we get confusion in a lot of this. Is like one way better than the other, but the collateral damage, that's the thing.
Well, you can let the results speak for themselves. And I think, so even with Kobe, again, my theory with him without knowing him is I think he actually had more of a fear-based approach for a season of time. And then I think he clicked into something else at a later stage in his career, where you could see him being more of a mentor and like caring more about others. And he started to do that actually with his family and his daughters. Now, I don't know at what point, again, that changed, but you could see a shift. He never lost the Mamba mentality. It just didn't have to be at the cost of others. Like, he could still have that mentality and build the world around him so that he didn't have to, sacrifice others at the altar of championships,
No, so I look at Kobe as there's Kobe number 8, then there's Kobe 24.
Right. Yep.
Then there's Kobe when he got in trouble, and I've read Grover's book, and he talked about the birth of Mamba mentality and where Kobe had to go into that place, and that was to get himself out of that dark place where he can go to that next level. And like, I'm just going to be a Mamba out here and take everyone out and take this other approach.
Right.
But I think if I'm not mistaken, in the book, he's like, he didn't really like going there. He just had to go there at times.
Well, he thought he had to go there, right? And I think that's the thing. That's part of why I love working with athletes, because I think they believe they have to tap into a dark part of their inner world to go win, instead of understanding you can also access love. And what if love is more powerful, right? Like, what if passion is more powerful? What if it's more generative? What if that's a fuel that never runs out? And I think that's part of what, I love to work with athletes and help them see is like, if you're experiencing burnout quite often, you're most likely building from fear and anger and rage instead of the abundant force of love.
Yeah. And if we switch that to art now, right?
Right.
I paint in light. I paint in love. I paint in color. And there's this thought in the past where people think about like the artist has to be this dark artist in the corner that's in pain, that's
Right.
suicidal, Kurt Cobain, or cutting themselves, you know, or Edgar Allan Poe dark, just this super dark space to create the most magnificent art. But does it?
Right. Well, I would say 100% no. And that's part of what's beautiful about the work that I get to do, because part of it is about inviting people into possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, you've experienced this way of creating, and maybe it works for you. So let's consider another possibility,
Mm-hmm.
that there's more than one approach, that there's more than one narrative. And what if this other way of going about it is actually better for your soul? You know, what if as a result of it being better for your soul, it's actually better for the world?
Mm-hmm.
And would you want to tap into that? Because again, you have access to it. And it's not saying that there's something wrong with the way that you've been doing it, but maybe the way that you've been doing it is limiting you.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe you want something that's more limitless, which I believe is the power of love.
Yeah. No, I like that. And the thought in there in coaching, what I'm just hearing you say is like, you're not trying to make anyone wrong in their approach.
Right.
You're inviting them to look at the other opportunity of what's possible, which is what I say. I'm inviting others to see the world through the lens of love.
Yep.
Like, just put this lens on. Let's not look at it through fear or scarcity or from reaction and irrational emotion or, you know, fight or flight. Let's look at it from, what if I take this in, respond, take inventory,
Yep.
notice, what am I feeling, and then try to react.
Right.
After you respond, like, oh, here's my reaction, instead of just autopilot react. Because even
Right.
I catch myself and think, I've gotten better than what
Yeah.
I was 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but I'm fallible. I'm human.
Come on now. Yeah. We can have some church about that too. Like,
Yeah.
because I'm sure that, you know, it shows up in marriage all the time. Because for me, you know, have conversations with my wife and she'll say something or do something. And for me, I notice myself wanting to get out of love and wanting to get into self-protection mode with a woman who I know doesn't want to hurt me.
Yeah.
Right? It's so crazy to me because this part of my mind takes over and I feel like I got to protect myself from her, who in actuality, I want to be the most vulnerable and connected to. And that's when I can feel drunk at times, but luckily I have the smelling salts that I have access to at all times to say, okay, stay sober, know who you are, know who your wife is, know what you're up to, and continue to choose love instead of fear. Sometimes I do better than other times because sometimes I choose the fear route and then I'll get really defensive and, and then I'll walk it back and be like, hey, that's not me. I actually told her, we had a fight and I was like, one of the best things you can do for me in one of our back and forths is remind me of who I want to be. You know, like that will wake me up. And that's been effective. Now, sometimes the thing is like, sometimes she's in fight or flight, so she doesn't have the mindset to do that. But when she's able to do that and I'm able to do that, we actually get through those fights a lot quicker.
Yeah, no, I completely relate to all of this. And sometimes to add to that is then, you know, she's going through her process.
Yeah.
And now we're just back and forth. And at that point, everyone's trying to be right.
Yep.
I have a really hard time with just like, do I just need to surrender?
Yeah.
Even though it isn't the right thing to do,
Right.
but like, what's the point? This is my wife, my partner, my everything. I don't know why I get stuck in the ways that I get stuck, and it's over nothing.
Yeah.
That's the funny part. It's over nothing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing, right? Is until we train our mind, we think the being right is about survival. We think the being right is going to safeguard us from a moment that we think is going to harm us, right? So it's through this work that I think you and I get to do that we get to retrain our mind to say, all right, being right actually will harm me more in this moment in the long run. And so what would it look like to choose surrender? Because even though that feels unnatural for a season, it's that way of living that creates more connection, right? And love and flow and peace, instead of let me cling to the things that I can control and be right about.
And do you have any tricks or tools for that help you, besides what you told your wife to tell you, to kind of snap out of it? Because, for example, I'm very...
I was gonna say, drink this water, and then when you drink, do a product placement. Drink this water, and you'll be fine.
It's really good. It's balance, love, kindness. But as an artistic and creative, and I'm left brain and right brain, right? I'm also very literal. If someone's looking at this red thing, right? It's a red love on the wall, and they're like, "Yeah, the purple love, the purple love, the purple love." I'm like, "It's red."
Yeah.
No, it's red. And I'm trying to correct them, not in the sense of like, I need to be right that it's red. It's just like, no, it's red. I need the information to be correct. And I don't know where I get tripped up in that. Is that, obviously it still feeds into me being right, but I feel like I'm genuinely just want to have correct information in the world. And maybe it's because I'm triggered by incorrect information or something, but like, what would it be that makes me continually, because that triggers a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, tell me more about that. When you say it triggers a lot of things, what else?
So if you were, for example, we're talking on this microphone right here.
Right.
And you're like, the megaphone. The megaphone. It's pretty close to a microphone.
Right.
I'm like, no, it's a microphone. No, just talking on I'm like, it's a microphone. Like, I'm trying to correct, like, because I want you to, I guess, look good too.
Right. Got it. Yeah.
But I'll get stuck in like, I have to correct you. And I don't feel like it's from me trying to be right, but I want the information to be correct that's being put out in the world.
I love that. Well, so, because here's where I'll go with it. One, I think that, yes, in one instance, this is a microphone. But if you bring our kids in here, our little ones, and you say, what is this? They'll be limitless in what they think this is, right? And they'll start to use it in some pretty amazing ways that really stretch us. So ultimately, what this is determined by what we're up to. So if we're here to record a podcast, we can say this is a microphone because it's going to help us accomplish what we say we're up to. But if we're here to play with our children, this doesn't have to be a microphone.
It's a sword.
It could be a sword, right? It can be a ship. It can be a grenade, right?
Yeah.
It can be tons of things because their imagination is going to run wild, and also they're up to something different. They're up to play. So that's part of what I would say, one of the tools is about event perception. It's about getting really curious about what we think a thing is. Because oftentimes we put these things in boxes and we believe we're right about the thing instead of saying our vision determines what it is. Our character oftentimes determines what it is. And so be open to interpretation, be open to perspective. And if we go back to, some of our conversations with, our spouses, if we're actually more committed to a loving relationship with them, we'd open up our minds to what something that they said that offended us could mean. And that to me is the liberating force, right? It's if my wife says something that to me in the moment is like very offensive, but then I take a step back and say, well, what if she didn't mean it that way? Just that simple question, what if she meant something different? I end up actually experiencing connection, at least curiosity, where I'm not convinced of my perspective. And I think that is one of the most important muscles to develop as a human being is to not be addicted to your own way of looking at it, right? And once you can do that, then you can paint. Then you can paint in the same way that you paint, because you're like, how do I want to paint this moment? How do I want to perceive it, right? Because maybe I want to perceive it as a moment of joy. Maybe I want to perceive it in a more contemplative way. Maybe I want to perceive it as an opportunity, right? And the more we're in tune with the colors that we can paint with, the brighter our pictures look. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I would say that's one primary thing to slow your mind down and really get curious about what else could be going on instead of what you think it is. I'm trying to think, like, having pre-conversation. So back to the question that you're asking, right? Is like, what are some things that we could do in the moment? This is part of what I told you is what I did with my wife is she's clear on who I want to be. I'm clear on who she wants to be. If you haven't had that conversation with yourself and with the people who matter in your world, that would be another really important thing that you could do is tell people who you want to be, like put it out there. Don't hold it in. And then in moments where they see you drifting, right, they can invite you back and potentially you can notice that and invite yourself back. But sometimes what we don't do is just put it out. We have ideas of who we want to be, and we're usually afraid to share it because we don't want to be hypocrites. We don't want to be called out. We don't want to feel ashamed. Instead of saying, no, the world is going to help me actually become that person. And the more vulnerable I am to put that out there, the more they can help me stay in alignment with who I say I want to be. So I would say those are a couple of like very practical things that you can do that's just top of the mind, before we get too deep.
Don't get afraid to get deep, though.
Come on now.
No, so I could keep asking you questions. I could keep going through scenarios. But this right now has gotten me really curious as to young Johan.
Yeah.
What is it about your story that you used to go share that led you to this point? What was it that you were sharing when you went on the speaking circuit that allowed you to now work in this kind of wisdom, in this kind of space? Because typically something triggered something to lead to something that eventually made you like, no, I'm going to step up, do the work, and start healing myself.
Right. Well, on a simple level, I grew up in one of the worst areas of Chicago. And talk about gang-infested, drugs, like all the madness that you could think about in a really bad Chicago area, it was there. Not only that, I had my uncle who was an alcoholic. He was a drug addict. He was a member of the Latin Kings. And I witnessed his life firsthand. And for whatever reason, when I was 11 years old, I was on my way out to school and I see my uncle drunk, laid out on the couch at 8 a.m. And as I'm walking out, I remember on this particular day, I kind of froze. And he was there with a bottle still in his hand, and the stench of liquor was just filling the living room. And I just started to ask myself questions. I'm like, am I going to be like him? I'm like, is this my future? Is this what I have to look forward to? And then I just made these very real decisions as an 11-year-old. And again, my mind was, a lot more simple at that point because I was like, I just don't want to be like this guy. And so I said, I'm never going to drink. I'm never going to do drugs. I don't want to be an addict. I'm never going to join a gang. And as I left for school that day, my life was different because I had, I would say, a stronger leadership footing of what I was about. And so I would move through the hood and when people would invite me to parties and all that everyday thing that would go down, I would always be like, no, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. And I noticed how much power that had as a youngster, where I just had these clear lines. And then I developed a reputation for like, we would go places and then people were like, yo, why don't you try this? Why don't you do this? And then my friends would say, no, he's not about that. And I got an idea of like, oh, this is what real friendship is. They lift up the best version of yourself. This is what real community is. They don't try to get you to do something that they know you're not about or that will ultimately harm you. They lift you up. So here I am, just kind of like teenage years experiencing this whole life. And then I start to play sports. I play basketball and I could see more of like my natural leadership gifts just show up and play ball and continue to develop. And then I got a letter to play basketball at the University of Chicago. I was 17 years old. I was so excited. Like this was the thing that I've been working for so long. So I took this letter to my academic counselor And I told her, I'm like, hey, I don't know what to do next. I just know that, like, I want to play ball. I'm really excited. And she reads the letter and she folds it back up and she gives it back to me. And she says, you're not smart enough. She says, this is one of the best schools in the nation when it comes to academics, and you don't have what it takes. And I left that room believing her. And so I share both these stories because on one side, it's like I'd experienced a certain level of pain and suffering and an example in my life that helped me understand, okay, there's power in my choices and I want to be a leader. I want to be an example. And then I experienced an adult who had an opportunity to use her voice to help me. And instead she used her voice to create this small box for me. And I was like, as I push forward in the world, I want to use my voice to help liberate people. You know, I want to use my choices to invite people into possibilities. And that's essentially, you know, even those two stories are two of the primary stories that I share when I'm out there speaking, because it's fascinating. We all have similar stories like that. If I talk to people, usually there's somebody in their world that's a family member that was either making negative or positive choices that influence them. And then almost everybody has had someone who has doubted them, who's attempted to limit them, crush their dreams. Like anytime I share that story, people are like, oh, that was my mom. That was my brother. That was my guidance counselor. That was my coach. Or that's me. I do that to myself, you know? And so there's these universal through lines that I started to realize that I was like, I want to share these things and I want to help people really become their best self.
Wow, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. I'm just hearing two things to keep it very simple. On one side, you took your power. You claimed your power. You owned your power. On the other side, you gave your power away. Someone took your power. However you want to frame it, either way, and you lost your power. And those two choices, and there's multitude ways of this happening, right? And this was a teacher who was in a position of power on a young mind. So that's an even more, that's a bigger offense, you know? And it sucks because teachers are gifts to the world and they're not upheld at the highest standard. So could we unpack that and say, was something because someone took it from her and she ended up there and she trickled it down? Not that she was doing it on purpose.
Well, and that's the thing is, I ultimately think she thought she was doing me a favor. Because she could look at my academic record and I think she already made the decision that, oh, I don't want to set this kid up for failure. So let me be real with him, according to her. Like, real from her perspective meant if you go here, which let's say that is fact, right? Let's just say I'm going to look at your past and I'm going to say the likelihood of you thriving here based on your past is very low. And I think this is part of why I'm a coach, is because I don't help people build from their past. I help people build from their future. And she could have sat in that room with me and helped me cast a vision and said, who does Johan need to be in order to thrive at the University of Chicago? Right? And then say, I'll do whatever I can to help you be that guy. Now, and give me a choice. At least give me a choice. At least paint a picture for me that's inspiring, instead of saying, here's who you've been, therefore, this is who you're going to continue to be. And again,
show both.
Yes, exactly. And give people the choice, right? Let them choose instead of, I think we do it all the time. I think, again, that's part of the temptation that I think you and I are going to have consistently as parents, is like, we want to keep our kids safe, protected from harm. Like, so the temptation is to be, don't do this, don't do that, limit, small boxes, instead of being like, go play, go learn, go get hurt. We'll come back, we'll talk about it again, right? But go play and go learn from this beautiful world.
Yeah, and I'm going to segue into parenting in a second, but to go back, even if that teacher had the opportunity to meet in the middle, they could have said, the way you just eloquently said part two, but they could have just said, you know what? It's going to take a lot of work, but you could probably do it because you love basketball so much. Like, even if you frame it that way, it's another way. It wasn't in one direction or the other. It was more like, here's the facts. 100%
connected to something that I love. Right? And say, if you love this enough, are you willing to grow in the thing that you don't know how to do yet? Because actually, you know, what ended up happening is I ended up going to another school. And I went to a school, Northeastern Illinois University, and I was like, all right, I'm not going to play basketball this year. I'm just going to focus on my academic studies and like become a good student, whatever that meant at the time. And I worked my butt off.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of my first year, I made the honor roll. And I was like, holy shit, like I had it in me all along, you know?
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, now I'm going to go play ball. Like this school has a basketball team. I'm going to go out for the team. And a couple months later, I got an email that said, this school is shifting just into an academic institution.
Mm.
And again, at the time, I didn't have the strong mindset. So I said what a lot of people say, which is, well, maybe it's not meant to be.
Yeah.
And I just let it go. And, you know, I would play in rec leagues around the city and people would come up to me and be like, yo, do you play college ball? You know, and then I would get older and my game continued to improve because I was playing in like 3 or 4 different teams at a time. Like that's all I did was go to school and play basketball in these other rec leagues. Mm-hmm. And then when I was around mid-20s, people were like, do you play overseas? And I always had that nagging thing in my head is like, what would have been if I would have made a different choice here?
Yeah.
Which is, again, it's another reson why I do the work that I do.
It's a motivator.
Right. Because I'm like, our choices are so important. They're so impactful. Mm-hmm. They're transcendent. And let's actually choose from this place that you and I like to talk about, which is love, mm-hmm. instead of fear. Because I made choices at these very integral parts of my life from fear. And then I look back and I'm like, man, I wish I could do it again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and now I have an opportunity to make sure that when people are choosing who are younger than me, or maybe older than me, or maybe the same age, that they're not making those same choices from that same place. But now they're making choices from love.
Yeah. And that's a way, because I always say, I don't regret anything. And then if someone says, do define 2 regrets. I have 2 regrets, but I don't look at them as regrets anymore. It's just easy to relate that to someone. One is I didn't go away to college. I stayed local.
Yeah, me too.
2, when I did really well in real estate, I didn't travel. I travel now.
Yeah.
But like, it could have been 2 different things. Who would I have been if I traveled then or gone away and experienced that? So like, I am going to tell my son, whether he chooses to go to college or not, who knows what it's going to look like in 20 years, get out of here. Go. Right. As much as I know it's going to pain me, but.
My brother, yes, that is facts. I would say, if I'm jumping ahead, I don't know, but what jumped out to me is I stayed in Chicago until I was 29. And my mindset for a long time was Chicago's the best city in the world. Why would anybody leave? You know, if you leave, you're a traitor. Like all that sort of like hood mentality that I had growing up. And then I realized that I hit a plateau in Chicago. And one of the greatest decisions that I made for my growth as a human being was to leave my known world. To leave the place where all my I could fall back on family, I could fall back on friends. Everything that I could predict was there. And I basically transitioned to a city where I didn't know many people. I didn't know what I was going to be up to over here. I just knew that there was an adventure that I needed to step into that would help me become another version of myself. And I 100% agree, because I went to school in Chicago. I did all those things. And I wish, again, I would have left earlier in order to grow into a different version of me.
Yeah. No. So segueing back to what I wanted to segue into, which is parenting, right?
Yeah.
You've got a little girl. I've got a little boy. They're basically around the same age. We're going to both experience things. We're doing the work in this space on how we raise them, but there's a big difference between you raising a girl and me raising a boy.
Yeah. And,
you know, maybe in the future we'll have the opposite each, and then we'll see how to experience that.
Right.
Because to me, the way I think I'm going to parent right now, and my wife and I, we talk about this all the time, because we don't want to relive past mistakes or carry on stories from the past.
Right.
But it's more so working on ourselves as better human beings will translate down. But in my case, like I gotta be the example.
Right.
I have to be the example, because I can't teach him how to love himself without me showing how I love myself. So I'm going to teach by showing, by doing, and by being. how are you looking at some of that? Because you just brought up, we're going to keep them in a box and this and that. And I can imagine if I had a girl, yeah, I'd have a lot of boxes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Right. I mean, and I would say, well, one, it's, I could already see how my daughter is naturally spirited and adventurous and risk-oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've learned is, how can I allow some of her natural instincts to flourish while helping her understand that certain choices have consequences? I think that's the big thing, is like, yeah, go out and make choices and then understand that, you know, like for example, if she's walking down the stairs right now, she's very likely to fall. So sometimes I'll like just put her on the one step where I know there's only one drop and then let her experience a little bit of that pain. When it was probably like 3 months ago, where she kept going after the stove.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've had your moment that's, you know, with your son so far, where I was like, okay, you want to go after the stove? I just picked her up and I'm like, you know, I was like, fire's going. And then I just put her, like, I was like, she was going like this, and I just let her hand get close enough where she was like, you know, and I'm like, that's hot. You know, so on one level, it's allowing her to experience the world and teach her the wisdom of her choices, right? Where there are certain choices that will hurt you and there are certain choices that will help you. And allow some of the natural, instead of killing her curiosities, letting her understand that chase after them, but also be mindful in the process. And I think for me, I want to be mindful, I think you addressed this too, of my own bullshit in her life, right? Where right now, for example, she'll have crying fits. And I could sense my own frustration come up. And there's this part of me that, like, I can sense that I want to yell. And when you talk about displaying to her, right? You're going to live in a world where people are angry at you or where people are yelling at you. And maybe you can learn from me. You don't have to return that. But again, it is work for me. Because even with my 17-month-old, at times I want to fight fire with fire. She did this thing, I think she was about maybe like 15 months when she started doing it, but she would play at least what I perceived was favorites, right? Like she would go to her mom for certain things and she would go to her grandmother for certain things. And I could sense in me, I was like, I want to give her the cold shoulder. It's like, I want to ignore my daughter because she's not giving me the attention that I want, you know? And all I did in those moments for myself was like, just check it, notice it, and then like keep showing up to love her and to be, you know, attentive, and things like that. So I think those are the big things that I want to teach her through my way of being. As well as I think the other thing is how I love my wife. That my hope would be that she would learn how she wants to be treated based on how I'm treating my wife, Lena.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the most powerful examples that she's ever going to experience at all as a human being. And that's why, you know, me and my wife, we're working on it because we bring in our own baggage and, you know, we, like I said, sometimes we fight over nonsense. And I told my wife too, I was like, I want to be able to fight in front of Isla because I don't want her to think that it's not okay to fight or it's not okay to have a disagreement or an argument. And then I want to display for her how you argue and get better from it. Because my wife has a family example where her parents never argued in front of them. So when we first got married, she thought us arguing meant I was going to leave her. And she would avoid any argument at all costs. And I want my daughter to know there's nothing wrong with it. It's not if you argue, it's how you argue. So let's argue really, really well so that we can grow and understand one another at the end of the day. No,
I love that. And speaking into that, I had a previous guest on, and his whole story was about his parents were the perfect everything. And he never found that in a partner. So he was constantly in a new relationship, new woman, next woman. because they're like, this isn't like what I grew up with. So it's the total opposite. So, and in our sense, like the rare occasion my wife and I argue or whatever, like I set ground rules where, hey, we have to fight fair and never any cursing.
Right.
You do not curse in an argument. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like
it's
just not a thing. We can get loud, whatever needs to happen, but that,
I agree. It's funny. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, you know, and if sometimes we get heated in front of Remy, we want to make sure that he's not startled with what's happening. He knows, okay, there's something happening, but we don't want him scared in the corner. So we want to make sure it's all within context. So I respect exactly what you're saying, because the last thing they want to know is like, oh, it's totally normal to cuss and yell at each other. It's totally normal to
just
nothing ever happened.
Come on now. Yeah. No human does that.
So, and I'm not a big arguer anyway, and we're not, but when it happens, it's the little thing. And I love that. Now that's going to just elevate. And I'm going to tell my wife this, like, hey, let's actually show how we do this in front of her. And it'll make us better at working through the problem as well.
Yeah, because we're more mindful of that, you know? And, you know, the thing is, too, it's like, I don't know if you feel the same way, but for me, there's a lot of passion. Part of it is like, we could say the stereotypical, like, I'm Latino, so there's passion in me, you know? And so sometimes, like, I get heated or my voice raises, but I'm like, it's not the anger, like I'm coming to get you. It's just like the passion is rising up. So that's part of it too. It's like, it's okay for us to raise up a little bit, and we can do that respectfully too, right? Like we don't always have to be this like very passive, I disagree with what you said. Would you please not do this again? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's very realistic either.
So that just brought up something in me, because I stopped dating Latinos a long time ago. Like, no, I'm good. I don't need all that extra spice. But sometimes I get a little louder, and I'm not like, it's not a yelling, but my wife's like,
it's just,
why are you getting loud?
I was like, I'm not even loud.
And I say, like, I always say, dude, I'm Colombian. I'm ostentatious. We like it. Like,
exactly.
That's where
it's
comes.
Just a little bit of spice.
That I'm trying to.
It's just some spice. That's it.
It's not a flex.
Don't get intimidated. Yep, exactly. And my wife's Puerto Rican, so she knows it too. But I think she's like way better at her not allowing that to take over. But I'll try to tell her, like, it's not negative, you know?
So what do you have next? What do you have coming up? What are you looking forward to?
Oh, man. Well, there's quite a few things. I just started a nonprofit. So I would say I'm really excited about this nonprofit. It's called Heart and Soul. And essentially, we're just gifting sneakers to people who need it, you know? And I have a lot of connections in the speaking world. So I thought where I'm going to first get started is just going to high schools. I have a speaking agent and saying, hey, let's do like little tours and things like that. We can connect to schools, and then we'll just gift sneakers to the kids who really, really need them at these schools. So that's one thing I'm super excited about. Another thing is, so I wrote a pilot for a TV show, and it's called Puerto Rican. And you can kind of get the gist of it based on the title.
Yeah.
It's loosely based on me growing up and feeling like the whole world always tried to put me in a box where I'm like not Latino enough because I'm half and half. And so I wanted to create this show that's like a little bit of Blackish, maybe a little bit of Rami mixed in, to create a snapshot of what does it look like to, instead of waiting for the world to invite you to the table for belonging, you create it on your own. So I have a production team, a couple people that I'm partnering with, and we're gonna shoot the sizzle reel in this, next probably like 6 months, and then we're gonna start pitching it to different shows. So I would say those two things right now, I'm like super, super excited about. And I think it as, because ultimately I consider myself an artist. I didn't know as a speaker I was an artist until I moved to LA, where I realized how storytelling is an art. Yeah. And then now coaching for me is a part of that art. So the bigger umbrella for my life is storytelling. I do that as a speaker. I do that, as a coach. And then I do that now as someone who can write and direct as well. So for me, all of it is the power of story pushing forward to change culture.
I dig it. So if the show pops off, you go to series, Netflix is like, let's go. Does coaching take a back seat?
So good question, right? So in my ideal world, I'm coaching, in this world where the show pops off, I'm coaching 6 very select people. I'm speaking 2 months out of the year, and then I'm filming 5 to 6 months out of the year. So that would be my ideal setup where I can do all the things that I love at the same time, and I don't have to pick and choose. Like I said, the umbrella is storytelling, and all of that fits. So it's just about organizing my world in a way that works. So that's why, my speaking career is great right now. My coaching career, it's flourishing in the ways that I want. So that's why now I'm like, it's time to go develop this thing.
And then being a dad.
Come on now. Yeah, I mean, that's the heart and soul. No pun intended.
So
let's go.
Now we're going to go to the really hard questions.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to ask two ways this. One, I want to ask you, how do you define love? But the second question is the question of the show. How do you define living a life through love?
Mm-hmm. Which one do you want first?
First, define love.
So, at its core, I think love is the ability to see the world as you. When you're living from love, there's no separation. When you're living from love, we're all connected. There is no inside, outside. When you're living from love, you can be both selfless and interested in self at the same time, right? Where you can love fully who you are, you can serve yourself in the best ways, and you can give yourself away for the sake of others. So I think at its core, love is a beautiful paradox because it's so many things at once. And I think as English speakers, we limit what love is because we're like, I love my donuts. You know what I mean? I love my sneakers. I love this. I love that. And we make it this like attachment to things and sometimes attachment to people instead of the very fuel for life. And maybe that's how I would button it, is like love is the fuel for life. So what does living through love look like? Ultimately, I think my wife is a great example. So I would rather use a story here than just like explain it conceptually. Because having a front row seat to another human being growing a human in their body and then like allowing that human to enter the world through them is to me the ultimate example of living through love, and from love. Because my wife sacrificed her body. She sacrificed sleep. She sacrificed energy. She sacrificed so much of her normal everyday to nurture this human for 9 months and give her the best shot at a life where she could flourish, right? Like our daughter. And then when our daughter was born, my wife, who loves sleep, she would wake up at 3 a.m. to pump every single day for a year. And I was like, I looked at her and I'm like, man, I don't know if I could do that. But I just I had a front row seat to this very powerful human being just living from love every single day in order to set our little one up for the best existence possible. And so far, that's the greatest example that I've seen of someone like choosing to live through and from love. And that's, she inspires me. Obviously she has inspired me in the past, but she inspires me to see this type of love. And I think sometimes as a man, like we don't have that thing that, right? Like giving birth and then being able to feed our child from our body. So it's like finding ways where we can do the same thing, but through our own essence, right? And I think that's where I'm trying to figure out is like, what are the ways that I can go above and beyond and sacrifice in those same ways so that I can be more like my wife.
So how you define love, that was great. I love that definition. The second part here, because I went through the same experience with my wife, but you use the word sacrifice. And then you also, there's a point where we kind of feel helpless.
Yeah.
Our wives don't meet on the outside world, our children first, but they know our child for 9 months before we know our child. There's a different bond. When that kid comes out, it needs mama more than it needs dad.
Yep.
obviously we're there to hold space and take care of our wives as much as we can, but we don't understand a lot of that.
Right.
And I know as our children grow, we show up more and bigger, and our role really flourishes later on, even later on than right now.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I go back to, I resonate with all of that, but you use the word sacrifice. Do you believe that sacrifice, the word sacrifice, is important? Does it take away from you? Do you believe that the only way to show love is also by sacrificing? Can you kind of walk through that?
I think it's one of the most crucial elements, because ultimately it's us coming to grips with the world doesn't revolve around us.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain things that we're willing to give up for the sake of another, whether that be our child, whether that be our spouse, whether that be our neighbor. Again, it's a beautiful tension for us to know that sometimes love is about giving up that thing for the other, and then sometimes love is about giving up that thing for the other for you. Because I think sometimes we only focus on that other-oriented way of showing up, where it's sacrificial for the sake of the world. But sometimes you got to say no to the world so that you can love you. And again, I don't think many of us know how to master the tension of these types of ways of being. We choose extremes. So we're like, give away, sacrifice for everybody, instead of being like, and now you're depleted.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is crucial. Sacrifice is crucial. And sometimes you're going to sacrifice what you want for the sake of the other. And sometimes you're going to sacrifice what the other wants for the sake of you.
Mm-hmm. And I think what I'm hearing you really say is you're choosing this sacrifice out of love versus choosing to be a martyr and go down that whole path of. And I think that is like a fine line that people walk through.
Yep.
Then what I've experienced from observing, from growing, from my own upbringing, parents, especially parents of culture and stuff, then they expect something in return. I did this for you.
Right.
And that's the one thing I'm constantly like, Remy will never owe me a thing. And I've said that before I had him. And I believe it in it even more now because I do have him.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, if our job now is to give him, her the best shot at life possible, why would they ever owe us anything?
Well, and that's the thing is what I've learned is that's not sacrificial love. That's transactional love.
Yes.
And that's vastly different. So and again, our parents did the best that they could.
Mm-hmm.
But I think oftentimes they were creating a transactional relationship with us instead of a truly sacrificial relationship, which means I'm going to give to you and I'm not expecting anything in return. A lot of people call it unconditional love, right? If we talk about that transactional love, it's rooted in a codependency that I don't think consciously try to set up. But again, I think we've done some of the work to figure out what worked for our parents, what didn't work for our parents, how can we leave our kids a little bit better off? And even though I think we're super mindful, we're going to mess up our kids a little bit, I mean, and then our kids, right?
It's going to happen.
And then our kids get to improve it too. Like they get to learn from us and, we get to experience forgiveness and reconciliation for the ways that we didn't get it right. And then they're going to go do a little bit better. And hopefully it just continues to be that.
Yeah. And I also believe generationally, we're all getting better. Right. And there are some generations in there and some things, and we made mistakes. But I think like our kids, the generation they're growing up in, I believe because enough of us are doing the work and having the conversations and going back to being good people, they're going to be the ones that are going to get us out of where we're headed.
100%. I agree. Yeah. I look at my daughter and I'm so inspired by her. Like I said, it's like she just has this tenacity to her, like she has this naturally embedded confidence in her and leadership in her where she's, she'll be leading grown-ups. We'll go to the park or something and she's like, hey, why don't you come over here, do this? Why don't you do it? She's like directing folks already. So yeah, I completely agree. I think with some of the work that we're doing internally with, what our kids have naturally, put that stuff together and they're going to be unstoppable.
Dude, I can't wait.
Yep.
With that, we're going to wrap. I'm definitely going to have to bring you on in the future so we can continue these talks, see where our kids are going, taking inventory of what we're doing.
Let's do it. Yep.
And let's see how many sneakers we can give.
Come on now. Exactly. My brother.
And where can everyone find you?
So Johan Speaks on Instagram, and then I have a website, johankhalilian.com.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to Live Through Love.
If you love this episode, you'll love this episode.